Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, last week, this programme brought you news of bullying, sexual harassment and blackmail in the ranks of the Young Conservatives. The allegations centred around the activities of Mark Clark, a former activist and parliamentary candidate who ran a campaigning road trip during the 2015 general election. In September, one young activist, Elliot Johnson, took his own life, having previously complained he was being bullied by Mr Clark. Now, Allegra's here with some new details about the case. What's happened?
It may be that there are more fingerprints on the decision to bring Mark Clark into the formal Tory campaigning 2015 machine than we first thought there were. In the last few days, it's looked like the former chairman, Grant Shapps, is being isolated, basically essentially set up to be the full guy. He's the one that brought him into the formal structures in Tory HQ, despite knowing that he was on the 2010 list of official candidates for the Tory party, and then he had to be taken off for allegations of impropriety. So it looked like Shapps was being isolated. But today, Conservative campaign headquarters, CCHQ, have conceded to this programme that the decision on funding, giving funding to Mark Clark's road trip 2015, that was taken by something called the party's senior management board. It includes the current chairman, Lord Feldman, then co-chairman Grant Shapps, but also senior people like Linton Crosby and also the deputy chairman, Stephen Gilbert. So that decision to give the Mark Clark organisation funding was taken at this incredibly senior level. If that is the full picture, it's difficult to paint it as a Grant Shapps cock-up.
But then what about this idea that nobody was actually reading a report on Mark Clark's behaviour from 2010?
Indeed, so we have news on that. Grant Shapps, we understand, did read the 2010, the inquiry or the report into Clark's behaviour in 2010. Now, last week, a young Tory activist told our colleagues, James Clayton and Esther Oxford, that they had given a submission to that report, and in their submission, they had accused Mark Clark of extremely aggressive behaviour, verging on violence. That last bit, the extremely aggressive behaviour, that's the direct quote. So that's what was in their submission. Now, we understand that Shapps read the report and he believed it was allegations of rudeness, laziness, but nothing worse. Now, in the fullness of time, this report's going to come out. If it's as critical as our interviewee says it was, then there's really, really serious questions for Mr Shapps to answer.
Allegra, thank you very much indeed.
Now, much has been written on how the Conservatives secured a general election victory in May, but the lurid accounts of one element of that campaign will be making for increasingly uncomfortable reading for the Prime Minister. The Road Trip 2015 scheme saw a volunteer army of young Tories bust into marginal seats to campaign on the ground. But Mark Clark, who ran the scheme, has since been banned from the party after accusations of bullying, harassment and blackmail. Clark denies the allegations, but how exactly Road Trip 2015 was run and who knew how much and when has seen the party's chairman, Lord Feldman, and former co-chairman Grant Shapps facing awkward questions. Giles has been looking into the story. So give us the background. Who is the man who has been accused of these things, and what is Road Trip?
Who is Mark Clark and what is Road Trip? And he's been banned for life, by the way, by the party, which is very interesting. It was the 2014 brainchild of Mark Clark. He was a former 2010 Conservative candidate in Tooting. He was unsuccessful in his winning his seat, which was a surprise to some, because he'd been dubbed going all the way to the top by Tatler. He was one of the Tatler Tories, if you remember that. Shortly after losing, his then girlfriend came out and said publicly that he was unfit to be an MP, and he did subsequently get removed from the candidate list. Now, in 2014, he comes back to the Conservatives with Road Trip. It's a simple concept: bus in, as you say, young Conservatives into marginal constituencies during the campaign and get them campaigning vigorously on the ground. The party was very happy with that. It was sanctioned and part funded by Conservative Central Office, and funding was delivered with the blessing of the party's then, as you say, co-chairs, Grant Shapps and Lord Feldman. Now, on the ground, of course, Mark Clark was in charge. He's 38, he's in charge of a lot of male and female activists in their 20s, over weekends, bust into these areas. There is another dimension to this story. although this idea was about securing seats for the Conservatives, it was also quite transparently and joked about at the time a rehabilitation tour for Mark Clark. And I put that point to him personally face to face in June, and his answer was, well, it certainly didn't hurt, about being back on the list.
Right, so where are we now with this?
Well, big problems, and they are starting to come to the doorstep of senior figures in the party, and particularly, as you say, Grant Shapps and Lord Feldman. The papers are full of lurid headlines of sexual impropriety, drugs, blackmail, bullying. Let's just put all of that aside and just stick to what we absolutely know. And one of the things about this, which is tragic, is we probably wouldn't know any of this if it hadn't been for the death in September of a young Conservative activist called Elliot Johnson, who in a note after his death named Mark Clark and accused him of bullying him. Now, Johnson had also accused Clark of pinning him to a chair in a pub, and he also had recorded secretly Mark Clark, which has now been public, Clark threatening him, and during that, Elliot Johnson says, I think you've probably done this before. Now, we know now that a lot of other people thought that too. There is a heated email exchange from August, a month before Elliot Johnson died, which I have here, between Mark Clark and Paul Abbott, who was Grant Shapps' aide at the time. Now, whilst explaining, and it's quite a nasty exchange about how much he's had to do with Roadtrip and how much he's had to keep it on the road, and also defending Clark when, in fact, there were, he says, people in CCHQ wanted it shut down. He says this included, for example, dealing with all the complaints made about Roadtrip and your behaviour from associations, young activists, MPs, candidates and so forth, of which you are well aware. So that shows, this is the big problem, it shows that Grant Shapps' aide was well aware of existing complaints that had been made. Grant Shapps, of course, points out that he'd actually moved on from the chair of the party when some of the major allegations were made. And Lord Feldman, who said he didn't know any about these allegations until August, has been publicly criticised and countered by a new MP, Ben Howlett, who told Newsnight actually he knew about them much, much sooner. So the problem is coming closer to senior members of the party.
Yes, and we will obviously keep coverage on it. Thank you very much, Giles.
I've been getting away with it all.